good afternoon, morning, evening, whatever time zone you're on. If you're here in person, it's afternoon, but I know we have a lot of listeners online as well. And as was mentioned in the introduction, Davina and I are from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I'll just simply say we are the nice members of the panel because that's our affiliation. Not that Tasha's not nice, but Tasha is here from the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. And I would also just have to say, we're not the only exciting panel or discussion today, because everything I've heard so far today has been very exciting as well. So my compliments to all the previous speakers and for the attendees as well. I also just want to compliment SANS on the New to Cyber Summit. Just the concept of New to Cyber is so critically and strategically important to what we try to do at NIST, which is really try to match the workforce needs of employers with those who are job seekers out there, whether you be a student, whether you be reskilling, looking for a new different career, as well as those in the workforce that are trying to increase their knowledge and skills. So this New to Cyber Summit is just a sweet spot for what we need to do as a nation to not only develop that long-term solution through our schools and colleges, but take the existing workforce or people who want to pivot and change in their careers. So with that in mind, I just want to quickly, by way of introduction with both of our speakers here today, ask them to describe a little bit of their career pathway. And I know you've heard a lot about that already from other speakers, but I think you'll also hear some different pathways from the two of them, maybe as contrasted to the SANS instructors, for example, you just heard from. So Tasha, maybe start with you to just describe a little bit of your career pathway, how you became the executive director of a cybersecurity association.
Sure. Okay, we'll find the right distance. Okay, great, perfect. So my name is Tasha. I'm the executive director of the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. My career path, I think, starts at a very similar place as many other women in my generation. Coming from a working class family with an aptitude for STEM, I thought I needed to be a doctor to have any type of economic mobility. So I studied neuroscience as an undergrad. I got a fellowship with the National Institutes of Health because that's what it felt like I had to do. And I quickly realized that biological science was not for me. I still thought maybe medicine was a choice, but increasingly public health kind of became my next step. And I actually saw in the Slack earlier there was somebody else around who was pivoting from public health to cyber. I think it's a fantastic way to pivot. And before I came to this institution, I did clinical research and community health. I led a human services nonprofit for about 4 years. And then I decided to do something different. So things that really excited me about CAMI, I came from the clinical research kind of framework. Of course, HIPAA, all sorts of other GRC is critically important there, so I always had an interest in that. Workforce development, so SANS, obviously huge partners of ours, as well as economic development. So after about 5 days of studying cyber, which is what I had to promise the board I would do to take this position, I wish I had found this career much faster, Rodney. I get really excited by this work. I get to do educational events now, as well as support our 600 members, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But yeah,
that's great. And we heard the previous speaker talk about the T, kind of the breadth of experience and the in-depth knowledge, and you've come from a variety of different backgrounds. I especially like the economic development, workforce development, which of course in an association world is extremely important. But as we'll get into more in a moment, it just shows the variety of types of roles that there are. Davina, how about your career path?
So my career path started biochemistry as an undergrad and did some work testing JP5 jet fuel. There's only so much you can, interacting with the titrator or gas chromatograph gets a little lonely sometimes in that lab, so broke out of that and got into teaching, and so went back and got a teaching certificate and taught high school chemistry and physics, and then also in community college, and then in 4-year. And in the 4-year institution, actually at University of Maryland in the College of Education, where I was really interested in STEM and workforce in STEM, specifically with technology, and through that was able to connect with one of the National Science Foundation ATE grants, Advanced Technology Education, and through that we it was actually the grant itself was, the lead institution was Prince George's Community College, but in affiliation with other universities in 4 years, so myself within the College of Education at College Park. And that's how I got into that ATE grant, that NSF grant, was in cybersecurity workforce development. So just got more entrenched in that. At the same time, in the College of Education, I was doing research in what I called C3, cyber ethics, cybersecurity, and cyber safety. And so that connection between those areas of cyber awareness and how that connects to workforce development, or at least preparing students to go in. So education, chemistry, something for everyone in cybersecurity.
That's great. And your background really shows the importance of teachers. And the last panel had instructors, SANS instructors, but we take for granted that part of this workforce we need to develop our teachers and faculty and instructors, and they're in demand as well. So that career path is really helpful. So Tasha, your association has done a research study in 2022 of its members. So maybe first describe who your members are, and two, what did you learn from that study on workforce development?
Yeah, certainly. So we currently have 662 members, I think was the number this morning. And about 500 of those are cyber or IT firms. So they kind of range all the way from 2 to 10 people government contracting firms with very niche missions, all the way to the global names that we know like Cisco and Motorola Solutions. So he really runs the gamut. But many of our companies are in that small to medium business, as we would call them. So we did this study, as Rodney mentioned, of really where we saw the challenges, because I know it can be really frustrating as somebody wanting to get into the field when we're over here tooting our horns saying we have 26,000 jobs open in Maryland alone. So we started with a very small pilot study to look to see where some of those challenges were. And the number one challenge that we heard was lack of specific technical knowledge. And technical knowledge that came up over and over again: cloud security, software development, network security, kind of the GRC, again, governance, risk compliance, and lastly, kind of the more standard engineering things. So we try to connect them with those things, but those were the 5 things that really stood out. But really some of these other kind of essential skills that I think career changers already have, right? So the ability to communicate. We heard it earlier. Communication is key. So many parts of cyber. The ability to work on a team. Many, many, many industries have multifaceted teams like cyber have. So the ability to communicate with different types of people and work together as a team. And lastly, I would say that problem-solving, critical thinking, which again, a lot of folks who are switching into cyber, you already have.
So what struck me about the results of the study is I did not see anywhere that we need more candidates with degrees and certifications, with all due respect to GX certifications. What we heard was we need more candidates with skills. So what does that really say about maybe the way the market is slowly starting to change, with an emphasis on skills, recruitment and hiring, and not just credentials like academic degrees?
Absolutely. One of the things that we see a lot is this movement towards competency-based hiring, skill-based hiring, and increasingly companies and recruiters are trying to figure out how they can assess for those things. Because I think you're right, a lot of people, unless they're working on a government contract where very black and white it says they need these credentials, it's not as important to all employers. And I think the other thing that goes along with that is the creation of a professional development plan for their employees. Because we recognize, again, that not everybody is going to show up. No, if they look for somebody who's a unicorn and has all the skills on day one, they're not going to find them. So I think a lot of these employers are open to hiring somebody outside of who would have been maybe a traditional hire, but working with people like SANS, people like, all over the place, to build those professional development plans for their employees. I think to really focus on those skills once again, not necessarily the certifications.
And cybersecurity certainly is a nice career, but we're not here to talk about nice careers per se. We're here to talk about careers based upon a framework that NIST has developed called the NIST Workforce Framework for Cybersecurity. Perhaps you've already heard it introduced today. I know you hear more about it after we're finished here. But Davina, can you talk a little bit about how the NIST framework can really help our audience here understand the variety of types of skills and pathways in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so uh, not a big shock to know that what we have heard over the years is that there is a disconnect between what students are receiving, like in education academic institutions, and what the employers are actually wanting. And so you're having to, you know, pick up an employee, but then send them back for additional training. So the NICE Workforce Framework has been developed with industry input to really emphasize what exactly they're looking for. And it has the flexibility also to be able to adjust. There's a process to be able to keep that updating as we see new technologies emerge. So within the framework, it's based on the knowledge and skills of, and those knowledge and skills, or the skills that an individual can, are packaged into tasks, and then those tasks are what roll into particular work roles. So there are actually, right now, 52 work roles within the NICE Workforce Framework, so that's always a little shocking for some folks that are not familiar with the landscape, because they just think that, you know, you're a hacker in a basement, and that's about all the options that you have. And it's not. There's a wide variety. And so with employers, they're able to use the framework to do an assessment on their human capital that you have. What are the skill sets that our current employees have? Are there things that our current employees, we could upskill them to fit particular positions? Or do we actually need to have openings and hire new roles or new positions? So it allows you to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on within your own landscape and your own industry sector, and develop your workforce strategically so that you can effectively and efficiently do that. For academia, as well as training and certification providers, it allows them to be able to adjust their curriculum and their content and their resources so that it's actually aligning to what industry is saying they would like people to have when they enter into those positions. And for an individual, whether you're a high school student or middle school student or a parent, or you're looking for a job, or you're thinking about transitioning, it allows you to do an inventory of what skills do I already have. What can I pivot? What are the competencies that I could kind of make a little pivot there and maybe pick up some additional training or a certification or whatever it might be to make a change, just like you've heard on the panel itself, the positions that, the pivots that we made. It also allows you to see the job opportunities that are out there. I was talking with some individuals early, and they thought, a lot of folks that I have spoken with before say that, digital forensics seems to be something. But I think they have this vision that it's going to be like CIS, like the TV show. And so if you can dig down and actually see the skill sets that it involves, that might not be exactly your cup of tea, but maybe something else is. Maybe, policy or legal or teaching.
Let's come back to that in a moment. I wanted to go back to Tasha to talk about your membership, because you said a majority of them are IT companies, cybersecurity companies, but I know we've discussed that your membership is growing and broadening. So when we think about cybersecurity, at least in the United States, I don't like to think of it as a sector. Sure, there are sectors that provide products and services, but quite frankly, auditors, lawyers, consulting firms, there's a variety of people who even provide cybersecurity services. But when you talk about protecting environments, protecting workplaces. Every sector of the economy needs cybersecurity work. How is that translating in your membership and maybe with some of your study results?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the, just last year we started kind of attracting other members to our association. So we now have security professionals, security teams, and healthcare, finance, critical infrastructure, utilities, all and everything, under critical infrastructure, anything you could think of, we're really starting to attract. So that's, I think, the number one thing that we've seen. And many of those folks are doing really critical work around cybersecurity analysts, SOC analysts, and several others. But I would say the other thing you hit on with digital forensics, lawyers, auditors. A lot of those people are also coming to our association and really are growing in the industry. And I would say compliance and governance is something we hear a lot. And I mean, this risk management now is coming from accounting firms and other people that we wouldn't normally think of as doing cyber, but it's all there now.
I walked around the hallway for the training you're receiving today, or others are receiving, and saw strategic planning, policy, and leadership, which is actually my career path. I was the director of policy and planning, and my background is in law and business, and a lot of the work we do now within NIST is very policy-oriented as well. So Davina, I want to come back to what you started to talk about a little bit in terms of the variety of types of careers and work roles, and not only many different sectors, but even within those sectors, how does the NICE framework really help to illuminate the variety of types of careers that are available?
It allows you to dig down and find out what particular skills there are, but also bring awareness then of the opportunities that are out there in the different industry sectors and the pathways that you can get there. So there are some that are great for 4-year, but there are 2-year options. There are certification, industry accredited certification bodies. There are online training that you can do. There are other ways to get work-based experiences through competitions, and the competitions just aren't the capture the flag. There are social engineering competitions, there are policy competitions, so that allows you to be able to participate and get that work-based experience in those areas. And from that, you can kind of tease out, you can test the water a little bit to find out what exactly the area, the career in those 52 work roles that you're interested in. And I should also just re-emphasize that the work roles are not equivalent to a job title. So it's important. If you're in a small business, you might have 10 work roles, whereas in a large industry, you might have the luxury of only having a couple of work roles. But to be able to test the water and see those through those skills and knowledge.
So let's go back to that topic of small businesses, because I think your study looked at your membership and the size of organizations. As I recall it, the vast majority were small. Mm-hmm. So what do you find with your membership, and what's the important emphasis here? Not everybody's a large organization that could have all these specialists.
Yeah, certainly. I will say in our experience, when our members hire, they're not hiring for a lot of roles. And to one of Davina's last points, you might be hired to do a lot of hats. You're not going to be so specialized as maybe if you joined a larger organization with a larger security team. So it's a really great opportunity to learn a lot of skills and try out a lot of skills. So that's one of the things that we notice. They might not have a lot of hires, but they spend a lot of time making sure they make that right hire. And honestly, I hear a lot of folks hiring people who are switching careers. I mean, some of my favorites recently, somebody hired a project manager who spent 20 years in hospitality and say, oh my gosh, they're great. They know how to run a team, right? If they know how to run a kitchen or a wait staff, they've got this. Nursing, I mean, there are so many examples. And I will say one of the other things that I touched on a little bit earlier is that, although the top 5 skills may be technical, with maybe the exception of governance, if you go just a few skills down, you'll see things like technical writing, project management, a lot of these other things. So we're always trying to advocate for people to consider small to medium-sized business, because it can be a place where you really learn a lot quickly, and you get a lot of that hands-on attention.
So you emphasize types of work that may include the lawyers, the policy writers, the teachers, the faculty. I talked about auditors. There are a lot of those roles that in the NIST framework we consider part of the oversee and govern function. There's also a category that talks about operating IT and OT. And a lot of those people may not think of themselves as cybersecurity workers, but they are probably some of the most influential. You know, at our table, we were talking about using antivirus software or passwords or whatever else. I mean, those technical support specialists maybe have some of the greatest influence. But the area that's perhaps underappreciated is how do we prevent these cybersecurity vulnerabilities from happening in the first place? And NIST has a variety of resources on this. So Davina, one of our categories called Securely Provision that talks about not only how do we build secure software, but how do we innovate with artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things and other ways that we can build in security and privacy by design. So that opens up a whole new category of careers and how might people start pursuing careers outside of just protecting and defending after, you know, things have been built in securely. What opportunities are out there?
So in the technical realm is what you're asking for, or outside?
In the discovery, design, development of technology, products, and solutions.
So one is to come to the NICE website to look for resources, but also SANS and other, there's lots of resources out there, and to explore those. Is that what you're asking? I'm sorry,
No, it's just that we think of cybersecurity as protect and defend, which is one of our categories, a cybersecurity analyst, a SOC. You're defending after the vulnerabilities have already been introduced into your network. But, you know, at NIST, we look at things like risk management. We look at things like, we have a secure software development framework. We have an AI risk management framework. And supply chain, right? Supply chain cybersecurity. There's a lot of upstream things that if cybersecurity can get infused into that, we can reduce the downstream problems.
Yep. So and I think that's really important to understand that many of these disciplines or many of the openings and the opportunities are through other areas that we might not consider. A lot of our scholarship for service recipients come out of schools of business, in information systems, in public policy. They're not just the technical. So being able to look at those competencies, which are, you know, the skills and the knowledge, and see what most interests you, and then to be able to pivot. But I think more importantly is understanding that cybersecurity is across all domains, whether it be hospitality, as was mentioned, whether it be you know, a nonprofit organization, your grocery store. There is something for you, and that is available that you should try to pursue.
Great. In a moment, we're going to pause and take participant questions as well. So if you're not already using the Slack channel to ask questions, please do, and I'll relay them to our panelists. But Tasha, I want to come back a little bit to the notion of your membership and what you're trying to do. So you talked a lot about the soft skills, the teamwork, the interpersonal skills, the analysis, critical thinking. How is that perhaps a change in thinking from what we're all taught growing up, where it is the technical skills, it's the academic skills that really are valued by employers? It sounds like your survey results kind of flips that model a little bit.
It really does. And I think it again kind of relates to what you and Davina were just talking about. And, you know, as a public health person, I'll use the term upstream. It's like security is really moving upstream, and it's really, we understand now that cybersecurity is more about building a culture and keeping all of these things, and it's not just that really technical domain anymore. And I think as threats have advanced, as they've become more sophisticated, as everything's grown more sophisticated, as we have more privacy policies, as really more frameworks come down and regulations in some instances, it's really required us in the industry to be more creative about what those roles look like and really what we need to hire for.
And so, and just to be clear, it's not just about compliance, because we hear that a lot. It's like the whole comprehensive system, if you will.
Exactly.
Let me just ask one more question, thinking from your membership perspective as employers. We have an audience here of people who aren't coming through, and I'm going to use the word traditional, meaning high school, college to employment. quite frankly, I think what you're doing is more traditional than coming up through high school and college, because anybody working in cybersecurity didn't come through a traditional pathway. Reskilling, upskilling, pivoting, changing careers is the traditional way that people are entering into cybersecurity. So how open are your employers to taking this audience of individuals who are new to cyber and are here at the summit and saying, we're going to bring you on board, even without that college education or maybe that certification?
I really think some of these other skills that, folks who are transitioning have gained in their other fields, it's really a superpower. It's like when we talk about increasing the diversity of our workforce, a lot of that is diversity of thought. So I think, as I'm sure has been covered here, will continue to be covered in the Glow Up Your Resume. I mean, really looking at your resume and tailoring it to whatever a job description or employer is looking for, you probably have the skills right there. And really just leaning into that. I think a lot of people get sometimes self-conscious in my conversations of either taking a break or coming from a different industry, but it really is your superpower. So I would say, lean into it. It's a great differentiator. And the other thing, which I hear a lot of already here, is kind of like creating your own professional development plan. It's important to acknowledge what you might know, what you might not know right now, and like you don't necessarily have to highlight that as a deficiency or whatever, but having a plan to show that you're curious and want to keep driving forward, I think is the number one thing that people look for when they hire.
So on that note of diversity of thought, I want to ask my last question to both of you, which is on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which is a high priority for the federal government. I think it's a high priority for a lot of employers as well. Davina, starting with you, I think you're leaving tomorrow for a conference for WESIS, the Women in Cybersecurity Conference, which, by the way, I'm going to ask Davina to describe more what WESIS is, but I always had a hard time understanding, is it WISIS or is it WESIS? And the women told me it's we sis, right? We sisters. So what is WESIS? What are you about to go to? And how can maybe women or men in the audience, participate in organizations like that?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. We heard it throughout the morning session as well. Networking is really, really key. And so with that, there are a number of different associations and different organizations, different conferences that focus on minority. In the case of WISIS, it's a conference that was originally started, or the seed funding came from the National Science Foundation. It was to focus on women, but it is open to any and all, although the majority are women at the conference. The important piece, and just to follow up with the conversation with the employment, is a lot of times at this point in time, those job descriptions are like for a unicorn. It's something that is impossible to meet. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And if you see just 3 or 4 of the points that they bring out in that job description, you're probably really well qualified to meet that. So I think that is really important, and to understand that what you have come, whether it's from high school, whether it's from an academic institution, or whether you're reskilling or pivoting or whatever the case, you probably have a set of skills that you can tweak to meet that particular job description. And one of the things that WISIS tries to emphasize, because for women, we recognize that one, job description, sometimes the language itself is not really inviting to women. It's like work hard, play hard. Well, if you're, that sounds really cool, except if you're a woman who has 2 kids at home, you probably, it's a different. So the language that we use in those job descriptions needs to be tweaked so that it's inviting to a variety of this. So there's a whole range of activities. WISIS is just one that tries to address some of those.
So Tasha, I assume I spoke appropriately that your members are committed to diversity, but again, thinking of the audience here who are going to be seeking careers and jobs in cybersecurity, if they're applying or trying to demonstrate their capability to your membership, how do they do that? How do they demonstrate their commitment? How do they maybe demonstrate their capabilities? How is that whole diversity discussion going to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that is really, and it goes back to the kind of continuous improvement process and how do you continue to grow in this industry, is to see involvements in things like SANS, maybe working groups that are available to you, maybe some of these other interest groups. There are lots and lots of associations, ours included, but many that build on that and maybe have mentorship programs, and they can give you some really good, I think, one-on-one advice as well. But I just think, you know, folks look to hire to, as big as an extent as you can, you know, be involved in the community and just always demonstrate like your willingness and your dedication to continue learning.